we have two different kinds of English students. The first group is the one we call English as a second language students. The second group is the English as a foreign language students. What's the difference between ESL and EFSL? The basic difference is that English as a second language students are students of English who live in the country where they need English to communicate and solve problems. They work in that country, they live in that country, and they need English as a second language to master it to solve their daily problems. The second group of English students is the English as a foreign language students. English as a foreign language students usually live in a country where English is not the first language. So, it could be a Chinese student living in China, a Brazilian student living in Brazil, etc., etc. The need to reduce our accent is not so important when we are English as a foreign language students, because we need English, but it is not important to reduce our accent. When we live in a country where English is the first language, like, for example, in the United States, the story is a bit different. English students need to master English not just in grammar and vocabulary, but they need to master pronunciation. Pronunciation is a key word in their learning process. So, accent reduction has become one of the most important tools for English students in the United States or in an English-speaking country. This is absolutely true. If an ESL student, English as a second language student, works in an area related to communication or he works in a professional field, it is easy to understand the need of improving his accent is absolutely mandatory. The better his English is, the better he is going to be understood. But the story for English as a foreign language students is completely different. Most of the students are okay by learning grammar and vocabulary, and pronunciation becomes something that is additional and not necessary. This is a very crucial mistake. To master a language, we need to master pronunciation. In most of the language centers around the world, English as a foreign language students learn about pronunciation at the very end of most of the programs. It means that if an English program lasts 3 years, they are going to have a course on phonetics for 3 months, and with that knowledge, they are going to be able to overcome most of their pronunciation problems. But this is not true. The learning of pronunciation should be done from the very beginning, from the first lesson, not from the last ones. This is the way English should be taught, but unfortunately, this is not the reality. A correct approach in teaching English should emphasize the reduction of accent from the first session. So, the first step in learning a language, the first step in mastering a language, should be the reduction of our accent. Every single language has a different kind of voice, so we need to work on the student's voice to improve their accent and to make them closer to a native speaker. There are certain voice quality settings that we need to teach the students in order to help them to improve their accent. Without this knowledge, pronunciation is very limited. It is said that every single language has its own accent, its own voice, and this is true. A Spanish speaker's voice is different from English speaker's voice. They have different settings, different voice qualities, different timbre. So, what can we do in order to help students to achieve that desired American English accent? The first step is to be aware about the voice quality settings of the American English accent. And we can mention some aspects that are very important in accent reduction. So, one of the first characteristics of English is that native speakers usually speak with spread lips. It means that they don't round the lips. Another characteristic of the speech of native speakers of English is that they usually use an open jaw, but they don't open their jaw too much. A third characteristic is the position of the tongue. The position of the tongue tends to be a palatalized tongue. The tendency of English speakers is to have the tongue in the palatalized position. Another characteristic of the American English voice quality is the retroflex articulation. It means when native speakers of English pronounce the R, the tongue is curved backwards to produce the sound R. A very important characteristic of English is nasal voice. Native speakers of English have a nasal voice. So we can create that nasal voice by practicing the sounds of M, N, and projecting our voice from our mask. The mask is the area that is part of the oral cavity, the nasal cavity, and the sinuses. Literally, we are supposed to vibrate this area in order to produce a better sounding voice. This mask creates a very strong voice projection. Another characteristic of American English is that native speakers usually have a lower larynx. The larynx tends to be low, completely different when we speak in Spanish. We tend to raise the larynx when we speak, but native speakers of English have the tendency to keep the larynx in a low position. Finally, some native speakers of English have a creaky voice. A creaky voice is a kind of voice that is not perfectly articulated. It's a kind of voice that is very common nowadays among middle-class female professionals who try to get a deeper voice to compete with men in the work field. These are the main characteristics of English voice qualities. So we have spread lips. Native speakers of English have the tendency to spread the lips when they talk. A slightly open jaw, it means that native speakers of English don't open their jaw completely when they talk. They open it a little. And one of the reasons is because the existence of the schwa sound. The schwa sound is a sound that is not open, it's almost closed, and that vowel is the most important because it's the one that exists in most of the words in English. If this sound is the most common in English, and it is pronounced constantly in every single word, so that is the reason why native speakers of English don't open their mouth too much, because the schwa is pronounced in that position. In order to pronounce the schwa sound, they don't need to open their mouth, but just slightly. The position of the tongue is the palatal position, so the tongue tends to be permanently in that position, so almost pointing to the palatal area. When articulating the R sound, native speakers of American English tend to curl the tongue without touching the roof of the mouth. Another important part that is not usually mentioned is that the R is articulated with a rounded mouth. Nasal voice. Native speakers of English usually use a nasal voice. They tend to have a very strong projection from an area that we call the mask. They use their mask resonance. The mask resonance is the one that comes from the oral cavity, the nasal cavity, and the sinuses. These three important resonators create a very strong voice projection when we speak in English. When native speakers of English talk, the larynx always has a low position. This is completely opposite to Spanish. When we speak in Spanish, the larynx tends to be raised. Finally, we have the creaky voice. The creaky voice is a kind of deep voice that some middle-class women, especially professional ones, have created in order to compete with males in the work field. So, what is the lesson in today's episode? The lesson is that if we really want to master English, we need to work on our pronunciation from the first lesson. And to work on our pronunciation is not just learning about vowels and consonants, it's not just learning about intonation, stress, and other features. It's about changing our voice. Learning how to change our voice and to make our voice sound like a native speaker is the first step that we should work in our process of mastering the English language. Everything that comes next is important, like, for example, learning about vowels, consonants, diphthongs, triphthongs, intonation, stress, rhythm. But the first step should be to change our voice. So think about it. This is a very interesting topic, and we're very happy to share this information with you. Have a nice day.